Welcome to the very first episode of So You Tried to Kill Yourself. Now what? I'm Olivia Catherine. And if you're here, let me just say I see you. Whether you're a survivor yourself or someone who loves one, you are in the right place. Now let's get introductions out of the way, shall we? I'm Olivia, child and youth care worker by day, digital marketer by night, and mental wellness advocate 24/7. And I'm also a multiple attempt survivor. Fun fact, I'm the oldest of 7 siblings, a cat mom, and I can recite random facts about gut health like it's my superpower. But mostly, I'm someone who's walked through the darkest moments and lives to tell the tale. This podcast, it's for the survivors who are wondering, what now? Because life doesn't just end after a suicide attempt. It's only the beginning. But let's be honest, nobody talks about what comes next, do they? And that's where this podcast comes in. Every episode will dive into the messy, beautiful, and often uncomfortable realities of life after surviving. We'll talk about the tools and skills that have helped me and many others rebuild. I'll share my own raw and real reflections, bring you practical mental wellness tips, and maybe even sprinkle in a little bit of humor. Because hey, if we can't laugh at ourselves, what can we laugh at? Why am I doing this? Because being an attempt survivor comes with its own set of challenges, some of which are made worse because no one talks about it. Suicide is still such a taboo topic, and the idea of surviving and trying to figure out how to keep going, forget about it. People expect you to just wake up the next day magically loving life again. Well, spoiler alert, that is not how it happens. Healing is fucking hard. It's nonlinear. It's full of moments where you think you've got it all figured out until you don't. But I'm here to tell you that even when it feels impossible, it's not. This is your safe space to talk about the things we rarely say out loud, to feel seen, and to start writing the next chapter of your story. So buckle up. Whether you're here for the tools, the stories, or to feel a little less alone, we're about to go on a journey together. And I couldn't be more grateful that you're here with me. All right, let's get started with the beginning, because every story has one, and this one, it's mine. So here we go. All right, so here we are, the beginning. Every story has one, and mine is, well, it's a little messy, a little chaotic, but it's also proof that even the darkest chapters can lead to light. Let's start with a fun fact. I've been fighting battles since before I was even born. I came into this world 3 months premature with a condition called gastroschisis. The doctors told my parents not to expect me to survive, but the universe had other plans. And here I am, stubborn as all hell and still kicking. That stubbornness carried me through the first 18 months of my life, which I spent as an inpatient at Sick Kids Hospital. My earliest memories, needles, surgeries, and a world where survival was not guaranteed. That was my normal. And while I was too young to understand it at the time, those early years shaped me in ways that I'm still unpacking. The truth is, growing up, things did not get much easier. I bounced between family members, babysitters, and even foster care. My mom wasn't around much. She was either working or asleep, and my dad, while more present, had his own flaws. Abuse was a constant theme in my life, whether it came from my caregivers, babysitters, or even my own family. And then there was school. I was bullied for literally everything. Being small, wearing glasses, having health issues, being gifted, being pansexual, even for having gas. Kids can be cruel. But when that cruelty followed me home, with spray-painted slurs on my house and cut phone lines, it became unbearable. By the time I was 13, I started self-harming. At first, it wasn't about wanting to die. It was about control. Turning emotional pain into something tangible felt like the only thing I could manage. But that coping mechanism quickly spiraled, and it wasn't long before my first suicide attempt. I remember swallowing an entire bottle of Tylenol, praying not to wake up in the morning. But I did, and I absolutely hated that I did. The years that followed were a blur of more attempts, more trauma, and more pain. I've dealt with sexual assault, toxic relationships, and even substance abuse. At one point, I was so convinced I wouldn't make it past 18 that I stopped planning for any kind of future. But there were moments, tiny slivers of light, that kept me going. One of those moments was in 2012 when I drunk dialed someone who is now my fiancé. I was ready to say goodbye, but instead, he showed up at my house at 2 a.m. and did not leave. He gave me something I had felt in a long time, hope. That hope wasn't enough to make everything better overnight, though. In 2020, I hit rock bottom. After years of trying to numb my pain with alcohol, I found myself drunk and trying to bleed out. I woke up in the ER and had this realization. No one was going to save me but me. And that was the turning point. I wish I could say everything got better immediately, but healing is never that simple. It's messy, nonlinear, and it's full of setbacks. I started therapies, got on medications that actually worked, and even explored holistic approaches like gut health and mindfulness. Slowly, I began to rebuild. I set boundaries, cut ties with toxic people, and started focusing on myself in a way I never had before. I lost 87 pounds, moved into a space with just my fiancé and me, and began to find joy in the little things. And now, as I sit here recording this podcast, I can honestly say I am thriving. I'm not perfect by any means. I still have hard days. Healing is a lifelong process, but I am here. And that in itself feels like a victory. If there's one thing I want you to take from this episode, it's that surviving is just the beginning. Your story does not end with an attempt. It's just a new chapter. Healing is fucking hard, but it's also worth it. You're worth it. So if you're listening and feeling like the darkness is too heavy, I want you to know this. It's okay to feel that way, but it's also okay to reach for the light. And together, we'll figure out what that can look like for you. So why a podcast? Why am I here speaking into a mic instead of writing it all down in a book like I had originally planned? Well, I think that's a great place to start. For a while, I seriously thought about writing a book. I even jotted down some ideas. I even had a cover page. But the more I thought about it, the more it didn't feel quite right. A book felt too final, like it was meant to wrap things up in a neat little bow, and honestly, that's not how healing works. Healing is not a straight line. It's not something you just finish and then cross off your to-do list. It is messy, non-linear, and constantly evolving. A podcast, though, it felt like the perfect way to share this journey as it's happening, to be in the moment with you. Plus, there's something powerful about hearing someone's voice, isn't there? You can hear my emotions, my pauses, my laughter, and maybe the occasional crack in my voice when things get really heavy. And that's connection. And connection is something I have craved for so much of my life. But there's another reason that this podcast exists. Because no one talks about this. I mean, think about it. We talk about mental health now more than ever, which is absolutely amazing. But when it comes to suicide, especially surviving a suicide attempt, the conversation just stops. Being an attempt survivor is already fucking hard. You're dealing with shame, guilt, confusion, and a million other emotions. But then you realize there's no roadmap to what comes next. No one tells you how to rebuild, how to heal, or how to find meaning in the aftermath. Society doesn't know how to handle it, so it just doesn't. And that silence, it makes everything so much harder. This podcast is my way of breaking that silence. I want to create a space where we can talk about the things that no one else will. Like how surviving doesn't mean you wake up the next day loving life again. It's not some magical transformation. It's work. It's showing up for yourself on the hard days, even when you don't want to. And that's why I am here, to share what's helped me on my journey, the tools, the skills, and the lessons I've learned. Things like DBT and CBT, which taught me how to manage my emotions and reframe my thoughts. The self-coaching model, which helped me understand how my feelings and actions are connected. Community support, which reminded me that I am never alone. And medications, which gave me the stability I needed to start healing. These are all of the things that saved me. And they're all of the things I want to share with you. Not because they'll magically fix everything, darling, but because they're a starting point. They're tools you can try, adapt, and make your own. At its core, this podcast is about creating a safe, supportive space for survivors like us. My mission is to normalize these conversations so that no one has to feel as alone as I did. I want this to be a place where we can show up exactly as we are, messy, imperfect, and still figuring it all out, and knowing that it's enough. Because your story isn't over, and together we're going to prove that there's so much more waiting for you on the other side of survival. All right, now that you know the why, let's talk about what you can expect from this podcast moving forward. Spoiler alert, it's going to be raw, honest, and maybe a little uncomfortable at times, but always, always real. So now that you know a little bit about me and why this podcast exists, let's talk about what you can expect from future episodes of So You Tried to Kill Yourself, Now What? Each episode will follow a simple, consistent structure to make sure you walk away with something valuable every single time. Here's how it's going to go. First, we'll start with an introduction. This is where I'll set the stage for the episode's theme. Sometimes it'll be a personal story. Other times it might be an anecdote or even something you've shared with me. Next, we'll dive into the main topic, which is the heart of the episode. This is where we will go deep into a specific skill, idea, or story. It could be something like managing bad days, exploring relationships after attempt, or learning a practical mental wellness tool. After that, we'll move into the takeaway, which is where I'll break down the actionable steps or reflections that you could use in your own life. This is all about turning ideas into things you can actually do. And finally, we'll wrap up with the closing. I'll share affirmations, reminders, or even a little gratitude practice to leave you feeling supported and ready to tackle whatever comes next. But this podcast isn't just about structure. It's about connection. Each episode will feature personal stories from me, tools and strategies for healing, and conversations with other survivors. And absolutely, we will cover topics that do not get enough airtime, in my opinion. Things like mental wellness and how to manage it, navigating relationships after attempt, because let's be real, that can get messy. Finances, because struggling with money can be a huge trigger for mental health, and some of us didn't think we'd live to see the consequences of our actions. We'll also talk about things like how to handle bad days when it feels like everything is falling apart, but most importantly, finding happiness again, even when it feels impossible. The goal of every episode is to give you something tangible to hold on to, whether it's a new skill, a fresh perspective, or just the reassurance that you are not alone, darling. I want you to feel like you've gained something meaningful. Because this is not just a podcast, it's a conversation, a safe space, and a reminder that your story is not over. Before we head out for the day, it's time to address the elephant in the room. The shame and silence that surrounds suicide attempts. Let's just call it what it is, okay? Society does not know how to talk about suicide, let alone what happens after someone survives. And that silence, it is suffocating. For so long, I felt like my attempts were this dark, dirty secret that I had to carry alone. There's so much shame to it. Shame that I couldn't just magically handle life. Shame that I had tried to leave. And shame that I wasn't magically okay after surviving. And the worst part, no one tells you how to navigate that shame because no one talks about it. But here is the thing, okay? Surviving a suicide attempt is not failure. Let me say that again for the people in the back, okay? Surviving is not failure. It's resilience. It is proof that even when you didn't want to keep going, some small part of you did. Okay, and that takes strength, even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment. So what I want to do with this podcast is reframe the narrative around suicide attempts. Because surviving doesn't mean you're weak, and it doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're fucking human. And humans, we're messy, we're complex, and we are full of fucking contradictions, okay? But we are also resilient as fucking hell. The truth is, silence kills. The shame and the stigma around suicide keep people from reaching out, from asking for help, and from realizing that they are not alone. But the moment that we start having these conversations, raw, unfiltered, and unapologetically honest, we start saving lives. That's my vision for this podcast, to create a space where we can challenge the stigma and rewrite that narrative. Because your story matters. Your survival matters. And the more we talk about it, the more we show the world that there is no shame in struggling. The shame is in pretending that these struggles don't exist. And just like that, we've reached the end of our very first episode of So You Tried to Kill Yourself, Now What? Today we talked about the beginning, my story, why this podcast exists, and the mission behind it. We tackled the stigma surrounding suicide attempts and started rewriting the narrative together. But most importantly, we laid the foundation for what this space is all about: connection, healing, and hope. I want to thank you for being here, for listening, and for holding space for these conversations. Whether you're a survivor yourself, someone who loves one, or just here to learn, you being a part of this journey means more than I can put into words. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to do a few things. Hit that subscribe so you never miss an episode. Leave a review. It helps more people find this podcast and join the community. And most importantly, please share this episode with someone who might need to hear it. Now, let me give you a little preview of what's coming next. In episode 2, we're diving into the question, how did we get here? We will explore the lead up to an attempt, not to glorify it, but to understand it. We'll talk about the factors that contribute to those moments like mental health, trauma, burnout, and everything in between. It's going to be raw, real, and eye-opening. I can't wait to continue this conversation with you, honestly. Until then, take care of yourself, babe. Remember, your story isn't over yet, and neither is mine. So let's keep writing it one chapter at a time. I'll see you next week. I love you, and you matter, my friend.